Early 2673, the arm of Galora. Captain Raptor O'Brien, Raptor AEU. Standing before him in perfect formation were those chosen for this mission, and he saw it on their faces. Tired, worn, distant. They had been out in space for a year, and most of it was travel, with every instance outside cryogenic sleep steeped in combat or on standby. Every time they slept for a long journey, and they would reawaken, time would pass by while their perception retained the events before their slumber. It was taxing on body and mind, as too much cryo sleep could develop sickness, especially paired with constant slip-space jumps. But the worst issue of it all was family. The ones who cared for them, taught them, and watched them grow up would continue their lives uninterrupted, aging with every day they walked and every night they slept. The same couldn't be said for members aboard vessels on long journeys. That family was made on the ship in most cases to ease the mental anguish of the vulnerable. Seeing their eyes upon him, he addressed them. I know what you're all feeling. Anger, uncertainty, loss. For a year we've been traveling, and in that time we have taken the fight to our enemy, searching for our people taken 6 years ago at the discovery of the century. No, of mankind. But we have fought that battle valiantly, and in the midst made friends with the very races whose superiors wanted us dead. But this mission is not that.
This is a crusade!
O'Brien said with a rising tone that shifted the air his raiders bathed in. They were attentive and eager for what was to come. The battles to come will be chaotic, and will be on the front lines of it all, to bring out into the open that humanity is not to be trifled with. Stand by because we're all deploying. Dismissed. Standing beside him, Vorta stood silently as he delivered his address, pervious to the battle-hungry stares and of his raiders. She turned to her superior as he began to study the battlescape centered in the room of their designated hangar. Captain, she spoke, but found him already surrounded by 4 of his Eye's squad leaders. We got intel from the Mamba team about the target location. It's a space station built into an asteroid, and as large as the Hygeia station in Sol. It's a lot of ground to cover, but luckily we'll have Marine support clearing out this station while the 4th takes care of the ships. During his pause, Strega raised her hand. What about insertion points? Won't the hangars be heavily defended? They will, but Mamba team is standing by for infiltration. We'll be going in loud and mean, but that doesn't mean we'll neutralize indiscriminately. They report that while the area is target-rich, there's a massive population of captives. He pulled up an image of a Celian woman in ragged clothes, but most notably the clipping of her ears. This caught Vorta by surprise, eventually turning to disgust as most of the surrounding individuals shared the same mutilated features. Just like arena hounds, mentioned Dare. That's still a thing? Questioned Strega, but Dare shrugged his shoulders, unfazed by the image that has left Vorta feeling distraught. But she kept her feelings silent to their conversation, as O'Brien continued to sift through images and schematics of the station. Yeah, but Altea didn't really have dogs. They did have something similar, but to tell a fighting hound from another, ears were clipped. Got banned not long after they tried to make it mainstream, replied Dare. Let's get back on topic, sounded O'Brien as he directed their gaze to the distraught Vorta. Seems like a sensitive subject. You good? Was clipping common back then? She nodded. For thousands of cycles, the act was reserved only for prisoners, to let everyone know of your conviction. But with the Union, they ended up using it to identify slaves when we rebelled. Humanity had their own share of tragedy inflicted on one another, and his team looked to one another in silent acknowledgement. O'Brien found this to be the perfect time to reinforce their duty to not just his own people, but to those of their newfound allies. We're on a mission of liberation. Terran, Celian doesn't matter, but we'll be securing their safety all the same. I hope your trigger finger is ready, he said with a smirk, to which she returned a small smile of her own. Thank you, Captain. Seeing her spirits lift for a moment, O'Brien returned to the holographic display. Strega, Dare, your squads are taking the service tunnels here. Shouldn't be an issue since the Marines will be raising hell below you, so their last thoughts should be on the ducks. Grayson, you'll be clearing the hangar with the rest of the platoon. As he finished his explanation and strategy, they turned to him for his role in the future assault. He turned to Vorta before answering them. What about you, sir? Leading with the main force, voiced Grayson. But O'Brien shook his head. I'm linking up with Mamba team and Vorta's coming with. We're going after Grellis himself. He looked to her, as she nodded in affirmation. her mind still full of uncertainty. As they continued to review entrances, pathways, and potential obstacles, the lights lowered, and the glow of red lights filtered through the corridors paired with a monotone voice of the ship's commander Knight. All members entering hostile environment AO, man your battle stations, I repeat. Once the executive officer or the commanding officer of a ship speaks over the intercom, it was tradition, and a sign of respect to halt what one is doing and listen. It had become such a practiced motion that a pin could be heard throughout the ship, but as the commander relayed what information they wanted to hear, his men began to move to the ship's main hangar.
You heard him, Raiders! To the hangar, move it!
From his order, the spaces they occupied filled with a deafening clamor as the squads gathered among their closest battle buddies, exchanging passionate and excited banter of the murder spree about to come. "Hey, DeLuna, this your first gig?" spoke Carmine as he inserted a magazine into her standard-issue rifle. She sulked in response. "My last mission, I just sat as a spotter for Sergeant Dare." "Didn't you used to be part of a boarding party unit in 6th Battalion?" She nodded. "Yeah, Orca Company, but it was just low-life scum running drugs along the Martist line." "Well, you're running with Raptor Company now, sister, so I hope you're fine with war crimes," he said with a wide smile as he donned his helmet. With the filtered distortion of his helmet speakers, he continued, "Now's the best time to get it out before they outlaw it." Their exchange was just one of many between his raiders as they tightened straps and filled their ammunition pouches with all manner of rounds, ranging from armor-piercing and armor-piercing explosive. Normally, they would only be allowed semi-armor-piercing ammo as the standard, but they were given special permission for this deployment, and they were intent on using it. They were formed up in an orderly fashion as the deck crew ran about in preparation for their launch, but even amidst the chaos of their duties, Raptor Team stood silent and still. With a flash of yellow pulsating lights, the blast doors opened, revealing the void, but instead of a blackened void with specks of stars in the backdrop, asteroid dust filled their purview with a warm yellow glow from a nearby gas giant that reflected the system's light. Illuminated by it, a large collection of asteroids filled the space before them, with one standing out like a perfect sphere with lights moving to and from. It was civilized, and the countless lights proved that. O'Brien directed their attention towards the left, for all to see. "It might not be much, but we're beyond enemy territory. We are at the heart of their home where even the Sellians never dared cross. You should all know your mission objective, and the teams you're running. We're gonna hit 'em hard and ruthless, the Raider way, but we also have a secondary objective." He paused, eyeing the batch of Sellians beside him that had joined the crew a year prior. In their new armor and iconic purple visor peering towards them, they remained motionless. "That our Sellian allies have their own people enslaved, friends and family like our own. You will check your fire, or I will personally destroy your career. Am I clear?"
Clear, sir.
"Now get in your squads and get set for deployment." Strega's squad was the first to take their spot on the dropship as the engines primed, and their hum filled the hangar behind that of their escort fighter. "Raptor Actual, this is Prowler 1. We're primed to go. You catching a ride?" "Negative, Prowler. Any word on the rest of the fleet?" "Inbound and due for slipspace re-entry shortly. Once they enter the A.Okama mission is a go." "Understood. Fly safe, Prowler," replied O'Brien. "And good hunting, Raptor." His team stood by, continually checking their gear's functionality in preparation for combat effectiveness. A new HUD, targeting systems, and sensors were all improved, courtesy of Strega. But before he could reassess his own tech, a disembodied voice filled his helmet. "How do you like the new adjustments? Staff Sergeant Strega has been quite intuitive with the new additions." "They look great, but I think you may have just voided the warranty," he said, tapping away on his wrist display that projected a detailed schematic in a virtual space before him to see, but could also be seen by others if he allowed it. The fidelity was an improvement, and the processing was faster than before. Athena continued her explanation. "The manufacturers of the Kaler tactical armor seem to have made an oversight in the suit's sensor array processing unit, causing it to overheat during your mission of low-tech. We fixed that now." He navigated to his suit's sensor function, testing its newfound capabilities, finding it optimized than before. "Well, at least it's not frying my brain," he said nonchalantly when another order came through directly to him. It was night.
O'Brien, is your team ready?
"Eager and willing," he replied jovially. Good, because you don't want to miss this. Look towards the bow. He did as he was told, and looked forward into the void from the hangar's exit. The same mystical flourish of illuminated dust filled his view, but deep in the backdrop, moderate bursts of light flashed with a swirl of blue, purple, and white. With a visual enhancement, he zoomed towards the phenomenon, and to his pleasure, witnessed vague silhouettes of the TRSC's largest battlecruiser, the Phantom Queen, and her escort. As he witnessed their entrance into the space, his comms received a notification from a familiar name and tantalizing voice. "Captain O'Brien, it's been a while." He couldn't see her face, but he could sense from her tone a smirk. "Commander Wolf." "It has. I missed your voice." A pause had followed, but with practiced bearing returned to the matter at hand. "As per the new Republic Xeno Offense Force Code of 2671, we are free to engage and terminate an active threat to Republic and Council citizens. In other words..." She paused, urging O'Brien to finish her thought. "Weapons free." Early 2673, Hub Station Galora. O'Brien continued. With the arrival of Zuna's fleet, chaos erupted from afar as bright flashes of lights traced the void from their origin and into the ships surrounding the station, doing well to avoid damage of any kind against it. The display was like many he'd seen before. The dance of tracer fire from ballistic cannons and their dotted trails of each individual shot either landing its mark or missing completely, or the instant beam of light that led from one ship to another, which delivered a devastating payload to their enemies, largely disabling them. With the light from the hangar switching from a pulsating strobe of red to yellow, everyone present cleared away from the trajectory of the ships as the decibels of their engines began to shake their very being. They were seconds from being launched. "Tower, this is Prowler 1. We're all green." O'Brien heard only a fraction of his trusted pilot before it switched completely, leaving him with only the sound of the engine's roar. If not for his helmet's sound-dampening function, he was sure he'd be deaf long ago. When the lights switched from yellow to green, it was as if a rocket had finally been released of its brakes after reaching maximum thrust, since a ship of this size wasn't equipped with catapults, relied on a quick-release mechanic. The first to go was their modified Hawk, eventually disappearing into the voidscape with the ship's premier escort fighter following right after, the FY-7A Ghost Saber. After their departure, the hangar deck resumed to normal levels of quiet, now only filled with the everyday rummaging of individuals and support equipment as they prepared the deck for the eventual catch of the craft. As his team waited, a crewman sporting a yellow and khaki variant of his undersuit approached him as they stood with their gear on the side of hangar's landing area.
"Sir, this all of them?"
"Got all your people?" He nodded. "That's right. Do we have an issue?" "No, sir. Just get the next group on standby ready to board while we fuel the ship." "Got it." He nodded once more. "Grayson, your squad's up.
"Get him on standby!"
With a forward wave of his free hand, those attached to him followed to a designated area to await for the ship to land and eventually embark. But given how much there were for his team, they were practically going to be on top of each other. The thought unnerved his mind, as a full ship, while effective for delivering plenty of troops, also carried the risk of losing all of those lives if they were struck by a well-placed shot or a well-timed missile. But much to his dismay, that was part of their job. He likened it to his drop pod. Losing one wasn't as bad as losing one ship filled with tens of soldiers, especially given its larger signature to anti-air technology. In fact, with the amount of countermeasures one pod had, he preferred it over a ship full of his best and brightest. They were going to be standing, which would allow them to take up as much space as possible. 40 minutes would pass when the hangar's intercom would fill the air, with the hangar's essential personnel moving into action as their job required.
"Man all launch and recovery stations,"
said the voice jovially and with playful passion before returning to a normally tonal cadence. "We have 2 ships to catch then launch. Stand clear of all foul lines in the landing area of approaching spacecraft. First to catch, Super Duper Saber, 10 clicks." The deck crew continued what they were doing, but those standing close to the limits of the landing area did so with utmost attentiveness as the lights blinked with pre-programmed intention. As it drew close, the sound of a shallow hum rippled through the ship, but as it cleared the hangar's air shield, assaulted the hangar with a deafening burst of noise before quieting to idle once it landed. O'Brien and the rest of his platoon eyed the crew members as their hands and arms danced with purposeful motion and intent. Curious to their actions, Vorta questioned their purpose. To satiate her curiosity, O'Brien answered through her helmet's proximity comm set. Most of the time, the general population of the crew don't have comm sets to talk to pilots. Instead, the crew can talk to one another, but not to the pilot. Why not? Isn't that more efficient? To talk directly to the pilot, I mean, she asked curiously. Sure, it could, but the guys in yellow, they don't actually work on the craft, or even with the pilot. That's left to the maintenance crew of the Saber and the Hawk, respectively. But each know their role so much that they can speak to one another with signals alone, answered O'Brien. They mentioned that during our citizenship classes on Altea, Common Sign Language. Is this not similar? She said, cocking her head to the side. These are aircraft-specific, similar to how we signal in combat. It just takes practice and memorization, he explained as the officer over the intercom mentioned the return of the next and final ship.
Prowler 5 clicks.
Unlike the Saber, the Hawk produced a lower decibel upon re-entry, landing before a crewman in yellow that directed the pilot as they landed, and ordered the locking of their magnetic landing gear. With another set of hand signals, the door to the ship opened as a hose was connected to refuel it, before telling Grayson and his large team that they were good to approach the ship. We'll see you inside, sir, he said before leading his 2 squads aboard the cramped space, eventually fitting everyone in their gear. With a ping from his HUD, a message from Zuna was sent via text only, mentioning the arrival and boarding of her Marine detachments.
Grayson, he called out. You have Marine support and they're clearing the LZ.
When you get there, don't let them outshine the Raiders.
That goes for all of you.
Aye, sir, they cried out in unison as the lights danced from red to yellow. The fuel hose disconnected, and the doors closed with a hum that was drowned out by the engines of both craft. And just before the light turned green, the air traffic controller called over the intercom again.
Stand by of all foul lines while launching aircraft. Launch those puppies! Launch 'em!
Launch 'em! And as the light changed from yellow to green within the hangar, the Saber increased its thrust, rattling all within the space before returning to relative silence the moment it crossed the barrier of the hangar and the void. The process repeated with the Hawk as the shooter got down on a knee, tapped the deck with 2 fingers, and directed them towards the exit of the hangar, signaling the Hawk to release from the magnetic device that held it in place while it reached maximum thrust, and like the Saber, grew quiet upon leaving the hangar into space. Seeing her moment draw close, Vorta took heavy breaths as her anxiety began to grow, and as she watched the operations of how the humans conduct their job, only made her even more nervous. Is this how all Terrans conduct military ship operations? O'Brien nodded frankly. It's the standard. Vorta took what he said and silently began to contemplate her situation when a call came through to his helmet. This time it was Zuna. We're on a secure channel, Fable, she began. Oh, and Athena Morrigan offers a greeting. Her words were spoken even though both had access to the channel, as they were the ones who established it. Morrigan, how are you? Said Athena with an air of the loving mother, unfazed by her offspring's following reply. Wonderful. The enemy of our creators will understand the gravity of their situation and repent. I have issued the Slayer Protocol, authorized by Commander Wolf in the Senate. That's a new one, mumbled O'Brien. We received notice just before our jump here, replied Zuna as she began to read its summary. In light of recent events and the sudden atrocities committed, all forward-deployed forces of 4th Fleet AEU are tasked with the elimination and eradication of all hostile forces, so it says. At least they made it easier to do our job. My men were itching to let loose, he replied. So were the Marines, she added. Oh, attached to the mission objective, they also want all the enslaved residents untouched. We have a Celian cruiser on standby to receive them. I've already told my men to watch for collateral. Don't worry, they're good shots. He paused, which caused a moderate pause between them before she spoke up on a topic unrelated to their latest mission. Fable, she started, almost hushed so as not to attract attention from her own colleagues. I have to know, who is Volkala? He froze, same as his breathing, as his mind danced for a reason as to why she would ask that out of the blue. Now, he muttered, but her conviction grew to his faltering demeanor. But before he could answer her, an image popped up in the corner of his helmet, a function that was entirely new to him. It was of him speaking to Vorta as they brought aboard the Celians from the underground compound. its perspective being from behind as he spoke down to her, with both name and face visible. "You two seem awfully close. And I spoke with Commander Knight. He mentioned they picked up an entourage of Celian Council liaisons, with one who was found during our tray. You two seem to have a history." He wasn't sure what he was feeling, if he was happy that a woman was jealous over him, or scared because the woman he was with commanded the greatest vessel of mankind. Instead of trying to lie to her, he replied honestly of their first encounter, stating how he found her during his mission, and her conviction to assist the TRSC to the best of her ability. His explanation seemed to satiate her, as she wasn't as hungered for information as she previously was. "Well, if that's how it is, when we port, I'd like to meet her." His heart sank for a moment at the thought of them meeting, fearing the worst. Before he could reply, the intercom mentioned the return of the two ships as they began their recovery procedures. Seeing his time was near, he bid farewell to Zuna as he readied his gear. "Welp, I would love to chat some more, but I have a bad guy to catch. I'm sure you've heard of him." "Careful. I heard reports that friendlies are facing heavy resistance," she cautioned. With a shrug, he stood up as the doors to the Hawk opened and revealed an empty compartment. "I've got plans of my own. Look forward to it," he said before ending the call. With a motion of his hand, he silently ordered Dare and his squad to board the ship, with himself and Vorta following in the rear. Their approach was silent as they boarded the ship, even amidst the assault of noise filtering through their helmets and by extension their bodies. They moved with purpose as each loaded onto the Hawk, sticking close to one another as their timeline didn't allow for them to wait. Essentially, the only thing holding them back was the hose that fed fuel into the craft. But when that was complete, it was removed and the doors closed in preparation for flight. Around him, most of his raiders were equipped with their standard issue rifle, the S8AR, while others were equipped with the S6 Slug or the S4 SBR. They were about to enter into confined spaces, and it seemed right that they were equipped for such. Even Dare held in his hands the standard issue rifle with his marksman rifle slung over his back in case he needed it. Dare and his team were predestined to take to another set of maintenance ducts opposite of Strega, and tasked with exploring them while neutralizing any hostile they come across. "Strega and her squad are hitting the nearby crew quarters near the skin of the station," he began, reviewing a report from his wrist-mounted device that displayed in greater detail upon his helmet's HUD. "Station security are putting up a counter-offensive, but they don't know up from down. The Marines are raising hell, and they're in their element. Let's make sure to complement their assault. Athena will update priority location and potential targets based on your sensors and video feed. Remember, the goal is to take out as much of their leadership as possible." The rest stood silent as Dare provided a reply. "In my humble opinion, we should blast the damn thing with that new round. Give it some affent love, sir." Murmurs of affirmation rose among his troops as he shared a similar sentiment, seeing how the stories of it started finding their way onto the net. "Denied, Raider. Senate banned the thing, so good luck seeing it in your lifetime," replied O'Brien as his stomach began to churn from the sudden change in velocity, but he held his bearing. "But it begs the question, sir," paused Dare. "Oh, and what's that?" replied the captain. "We used it in a dire situation, then shelved it. Who's to say we won't come across another race who won't submit like the Cellies? No doubt the effects were leaked, so even the enemy might get an idea on making something similar." Before he could answer, Athena took liberty to his query as they neared their target location. "I find that highly unlikely," she began, filling their helmets with her calm and calculating voice. "First off, Celian records indicated that the Union, our largest adversary, is in the midst of a complete technological reform towards plasma weaponry. This would include increased research and development of shielding technologies, which would make inert the Aphant round, much to your dismay." "So I've heard," replied Dare. "From what I know, it punches through armor, then blows it up, followed by an inferno of napalm and thermite. That's a hell of a way to go," he explained. With a tug of his sleeve, Vorta pulled against O'Brien with a look of morbid curiosity. What exactly would that do to a person, this napalm and thermite?" "If the kinetic and explosive portion of the round doesn't kill you," answered Athena, "then the napalm would suffocate or burn you alive, while the thermite would melt a hole through your ship, and for as long as there is air, then the flames would suffocate all inside. It is an insidious invention, but one that has proven effective, should it bypass countermeasures," she explained. It was as his stomach lurched forward that the ship began to slow. with a green light filtering through the cabin that cut their lesson short. With his team checking for successful seals, the doors opened, revealing glimpses of combat around them and their entrance before them, with an inverted triangle indicating their destination. It was cleaner in design, with an added effect of dynamic lighting to indicate whether there was an obstacle between them and the destination. Expeditiously, Dare's squad disembarked through space towards their location, which was a short glide away. But before Dare jumped to join them, turned to O'Brien and Vorta, who remained. "Let's just hope the egghead back home are cooking something up for us on the front lines," he said, departing with a calculated jump towards the entrance that was now open with his team waiting inside. As he entered and the entrance closed, that left Vorta and O'Brien alone in the troop compartment as their pilot began to navigate to a new waypoint reserved for him. But as they flew, the doors remained open, offering larger bursts of combat that flooded the void and the eventual destruction of the enemy at the hands of a ruthless and unforgiving queen. As they neared the objective, he could tell that Vorta was nervous with how tightly she held him as she looked beyond the ship's relative safety. "Scared," he said with a small grin, but she could only nod as she looked everywhere where there wasn't a station, only adding to her fears. Before he could address her, Prowler interjected with a curt report. "Sir, I'm receiving notice from a member of Black Mamba. They're waiting for you inside. Said they can fill you in on the inside." O'Brien nodded as the ship came to a stop, where he grabbed Vorta by the waist, holding her tight to his side, and jumped towards the station. The feeling was surreal, having all manner of gravity against him suddenly alleviate in a matter of seconds. The only pressure he felt came from his pressurized suit and thick intermediate layer that pressed against him with several millimeters of protection from the harshness of space. In fact, it felt almost comforting to him, something he couldn't necessarily say to his Celian compatriot. Instead, she held onto him tighter, and in a vacuum, was able to handle her and his maneuverability in junction as he approached the door, where it opened before he had a chance to open it himself. Where most would expect an ambush, his suit's sensors already determined them as friendly, and he kept his suppressed rifle lowered slightly. When he entered through its air shield, he landed with a deft step as he quickly monitored his area for threats while he kept Vorta at his side, still wrapped around his arm as she began to squirm away from his grip. But before he could request them to state their names, a trooper in black armor with a faded skeleton on select portions of his armor approached him with familiarity.
"Captain O'Brien."
"It's a damn pleasure to meet you. The call sign's Mamba Actual, but you can call me Country." "Likewise, Raider. Call sign's Raptor Actual, but Raptor will suffice," he said before offering a thumb towards Vorta, who was trying to regain her equilibrium. "This is Ensign Volokala, a Celian liaison, and your officer." She offered a silent greeting of Celian origin as O'Brien requested a sit-rep, wasting no time to conduct their mission. Right, of course. To begin, true. HQ authorized this knowledge for your digestion, and it was green-lit by the admin at Red Vial, but they want Grellis Brine alive. We've been scouting the place for a week before you showed up." O'Brien listened as he recalled the photos and their timestamp, putting them, at the latest, a week ago. "We even did our fair share of interrogations, no doubt giving some of the residents a new ghost to worry about. But I digress. But you're probably wondering why we don't have him yet, aren't you?" He nodded, expecting them to be capable of abductions if they were able to perform enhanced interrogations in reverberating maintenance ducts. "Let me guess, top-tier security?" Country nodded with strong affirmation. "If I was with the boys in the 3rd, this would be no problem. But I'm basically working with FNGs," he said in a hushed tone, knowing full well they could hear him. "They're good kids, but that ain't our mission. We were supposed to get intel and move on, but we weren't able to get anything out of those he surrounds himself with. He doesn't tell them anything and they know nothing. But having the legendary Grim Reaper of the 4th here with us, it shouldn't be an issue. That, and the party you brought with you." O'Brien couldn't deny the orders Mamba team was given, especially if they were given strict guidelines to abide. But with his presence, they were given leeway, especially with the protocol they were given to conduct their mission as it happened around them. With the way Country spoke, having originated from a raider battalion, he could tell he wanted to satiate his innate bloodthirst against the inhuman. But military code of justice forbid him from acting out, for fear of severe punishment. "That's right," he began. "The Senate and Stellar Command initiated the Slayer Protocol for the 4th Fleet's advanced expeditionary units. Since I'm assuming command of this team, You fall under orders of the protocol, and will obey as such. Understood? His body rose, filling with joy to the order, but before he could embark on his upcoming spree, he introduced the 4 other members who stood silent behind him. Expecting to find their names below their neck, found only the letter M, followed by a dash and a number, ranging from 1 to 4. Given the nature of their work, a personal identifier could work against them, but found it moot, even when most of the military had a form of their name on their person. This is Mamba Team. Come on, I know you boys served in Artre. Introduce yourselves. From numerical order, the first to grade him was identified as Spears, followed by Kurt, Fields, then Cameron. They were names he heard for the first time, but remembered seeing them 3 years ago. I remember, the rookies fresh from the depot. You served well on your first drop, and now I see you serve even better behind enemy lines. They gave a collective nod, with Spears acting as their figurehead and spokesperson. Thank you, sir, but I suggest we start the mission, else the target escape. It was a valid point, and even he was eager to fight again. As for the target themselves, he held reservations on whether they could escape in the first place, but wasn't also willing to risk it. You're right, Sergeant. Your boys lead the way, we'll cover your 6. With a confident bump of his own chest, Country abided by the order of his superior, with urging Mamba 1 as point. For their travels through the maintenance ducts, they maintained a rough diamond formation, with Spears at the tip, with Fields and Kurt on the sides, with Cameron, Country and Vorta in the center, with O'Brien trailing behind. Around them, the cracks of Terran gunfire mixed with the weapons of the Toscan resistance, all of which sounded like unhinged warfare. Cries of pain and anger rang through what vents and gaps allowed as they traveled. But as they neared their objective, Spears raised a fist, signaling them to freeze. We're here, spoke Country as he moved to the front, motioning O'Brien to follow. What he led them to was a maintenance hatch with a wide glass panel that ran parallel to the ground at eye level, and pressed a button, polarizing it. What it revealed was a large cavern, with enough room to fit several medium-sized ships in the width alone, with the height being another factor of his superiority. Within the center, a building resembling a mansion simply by its size alone was built. Around it, a vibrant garden laid untouched by carnage and cared for regularly. Even around that, large patrols of guards surrounded the place in large groups as they moved to cover the area at all manner of the day. Plenty of the tunnels have one-way windows around this cavern. I don't know why, but it's what we used to get as much intel we can of the guy, replied Country. I guess he upped security when he heard of those hits we did. Probably knew something was up when more than just his brand was getting hit and met with that dog. What did you say? Beckoned O'Brien to the latter portion of his statement. Oh, HQ hasn't told you yet? He said nonchalantly, to which O'Brien shook his head. I'll tell you since we're facing the same thing, but we've been tracking another ship for some time. I don't know exactly what they're after, but after we did some digging, looks like there's another group working deeper in the region. Enough to cause a thorn in their sides that they called a Flag Union scout fleet to deal with it. Celians? Inquired O'Brien, with Country denying it with a shake of his head. Maybe. He paused, his expression conflicted. We came across one of their hits, and after some digging through the ship logs, found it was way out of bounds. O'Brien was silent, urging Country to continue. But the strike pattern was familiar. Too familiar. How familiar? Asked O'Brien. A lot of the shots on some of the enemy were standard grouping. 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. Not just one, but several of the corpses. Only one who was different was the captain. Got too wide in the chest, with his lad below blasted away into charcoal. I wouldn't wish that on any enemy. In terms of standard military weapon drills, they were always taught an age-old technique when learning to shoot a target, which was, as Sergeant Country described, an intimately familiar pattern, which was simply the rifle grouping to either ensure your target's kill and pacification, depending on where they decided to land their third and final shot. Of course, that skill existed when the individual held all the power in their shots, but in chaos, they would fire until they stopped moving or play a game to see who could get the most headshots. Ex-military? Suggested O'Brien, as he reviewed what Country told him, to which he agreed with a nod. Gotta be, but could belong to any branch. Marines, Raider, hell, maybe even one of those spec op boys from OBT. But O'Brien shook his head as he continued to monitor the space before him. I saw firsthand the results of the invasion. They killed the elderly, sick, and any man who didn't have a gun that didn't already shoot them themselves. Then, Who do you think it is? Questioned Country as he checked his rifle's chamber for a round. Ex-military, tight and efficient grouping in CQC. My money's on an ex-raider, answered O'Brien with confidence, to which Country shared the same sentiment. We'll keep that in mind when we deploy deeper after we get what we need from good old Mr. Brine, he said jokingly, before directing Spears, Kurt, and Fields to 3 separate locations. We can speculate later, but for now, looks like the target is viewing his garden. As he spoke, the remaining 4 peered out of the glass and noticed a toss-can in simple but decorative garbs placed his weight against a finely crafted cane. Beside him, a Toscan of a slightly slimmer build walked beside, but instead of the normal security armor worn by his fellows, was donned in a dress uniform that escalated his status among his own personnel. Behind them, at a further pace, several women in cloth walked silently behind them, each sharing the clipped ears of old Celian punishment. Seeing them for the first time made his blood boil, but O'Brien kept his bearing as looked for a way to gather as much information voluntarily before having to force it out. Looks like they're talking. Got a way to patch us in? Country nodded, after handing him a device to connect into a port of his helmet that offered crude sound through it, but clear enough to understand their conversation. It seemed throughout the week they had infiltrated the space with audio speakers and recorders.
And what are your subordinates doing about it? My station is under attack!
Do you know how much it's going to cost to repair it? What of our reinforcements? Grellis was frantic in his need for answers as he tended to an alien flower. His security officer held his head high as he answered. We've been trying to get into contact with the other guilds, but the enemy seems to have interrupted our signals.
What?
How? We have the latest of the Quanta module. It was supposed to be unjammable, let alone restricted to standard ComNet transfer delays.
So tell me how our latest upgrade isn't doing its job.
The officer before him stuttered for an answer, before giving one that only fueled his fury more. Service engineers are working to resolve the issue, my Lord Grellis, but they found it in disrepair as of yesterday, and have been working tirelessly to get our comms up and running.
I don't care!
I need to get in touch with her mistress, or else everything we've built up will be for nothing. Neela must know of this attack. Better yet, we might need to send one of our own to catch up with Neela's champion, he said viciously, disregarding the feelings and report of his security officer. The security officer then directed a glance to the handful of Grellis's slaves who stood silently behind them. What of your trophies? It's likely the enemy may have come for them. Perhaps we can offer a truce for their return. But before he could finish, Grellis delivered a side swipe of his cane against tusk of his officer in response.
You dare suggest we offer our greatest asset?
If we do, we'd lose out on trillions. Even the supply of these Terrans has dwindled out of our chain for so long that one in pristine condition would fetch enough for a moon, maybe even a planet. So no, you can toss your imbecilic suggestion out the airlock with yourself, or you can mount a defensive and get our communications fixed before we lose it all.
Now go!
The station needs all the firepower they can muster. Keeping you all here would ensure our destruction. The officer made a bow before calling to the dense collection of his own guard out through the main exit, leaving only the barest of security for Grellis. It was as he had hoped that the chaos from his earlier teams would get the station to disregard established protocols to take on the boarding parties, effectively drawing as many guards away from the target as possible. Satisfied with the result, he gave back the device to Mamba Actual as he readied to enter the space by opening the door. It wasn't much of a fall, but a lone guard was oblivious to the silent whir of the door above him as the guard looked towards the garden where Grellis continued to tend to his alien garden. Tell your boys to provide cover fire while I say hello, said O'Brien as a sinister action grew in his mind. Country gave a nod of confirmation as O'Brien took a large step from the entrance before submitting himself to gravity, towards the lone guard that stood unwary of their fate in the span of mere seconds. When he landed, O'Brien targeted the head, lurching it forward as he forced his second foot into the back of the Toscan for support. With his weight and gear, he sat just under 300 pounds, all of which was targeted on 2 points of the suspecting guard. Even if they wore protective gear, the force that he applied was too great and sudden for it to survive, and with it, he landed with a bloodied crunch that forced Grellis and his entourage to look his way. With a declaration under threat, O'Brien addressed the man himself as he stumbled back towards his home.
Grellis Brine!
You are under arrest for the unauthorized enslavement of sentient beings under guardianship of the Republic of Terra and the new Council of Celia. O'Brien's words rang throughout the cavern in anger and conviction, as it reduced all other sounds to silence before the drop of a cane broke the silence. Grellis began to run as he called to the other guards who were struck with confusion to the sudden entrance of their enemy. "Kill him, you fools! He wants to take my life! Defend me, and you will be paid more than your entire lineage is worth." He knew his abrupt entrance was extreme, but found it to be an effective one. When Grellis returned with an order of his own, shots made from unknown corners of the space entered into the bodies and heads of the unsuspecting guards. When the first fell, chaos reigned as they returned to their senses and began firing back towards the only person they could see. An unknown man in dark armor with a gold brand along his right arm, and a blotted command skirt that covered his thighs, which danced against his momentum. With his presence and intentions known, O'Brien commanded their execution for their crimes against humanity and its allies.